I'm Mary Massey with my terrific co-host, John Sakowitz. Good morning, John.
Good morning, Mary, and good morning to all of us here in Redwood Country and to those listening to the show on the World Wide Web, on our web stream. I want to, just a couple of housekeeping items. I wanted to thank everyone who contributed to the station on my Facebook funding page. I think we raised $350, and a lot of that was like $5 and $10 from people. So again, thank you for all of those who contributed to the station via Facebook on my birthday. I also want to thank the guest of our last show, Marine Colonel Stuart Scheller. It was a fantastically, enormously popular show. We post our show to social media on not just public radio sites and other platforms, but on this show, we also posted to Marine Corps sites and to Vietnam vet sites and Afghan and Iraq War vet sites. We got thousands of responses. And I want to say that not one single response was negative. Not one single response. So Marine whistleblower, Stuart Scheller, thank you so much for appearing on our show. You are a truly a voice of reason in the military and an important peace activist at this time as well. Thank you, Colonel.
Today's show, as Katie mentioned, and all programs will be archived right here at kmud.org and at our program website, heroespatriots.org. And you can look on Facebook under Heroes and Patriots. You can see a chronology of all our guests. Click the link and it'll take you right to the YouTube version of our program. So lots of opportunity to hear it after the fact. We invite you as listeners to call in with questions for our two guests today at number 707-923-3911. We do ask that you be brief so as many folks as possible can have a chance. And again, thanks again to our engineer this morning, Katie Phillips. Last month, the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling to overturn Roe v. Wade goes against the majority opinion on ending a pregnancy. Americans overwhelmingly want legal access to abortion, and at least in some situations, and also reproductive rights and health care. American support of abortion rights in some or all situations, meaning that they would disagree with the overturning of Roe v. Wade, has been fairly consistent for some time. Back in 1975, 3/4 of Americans said it should be legal in all, 21% thought so, or certain, 54% circumstances, according to a long-running survey by Gallup. In the ensuing half-century, that brings us right up to today, that number has gone up 10 percentage points to 85%, meaning the support has only gotten stronger. In that sense, abortion, like gun control, is an issue where American policy appears to be at odds with American majority opinions. And talking about this today is a return guest. He is Professor Francis Boyle. Professor Boyle is an international law professor at the University of Illinois. He is a return guest, John. We've had him on the program before talking about bioweaponry and some other atrocities.
Francis Boyle is just awesome. His resume is so extensive. Harvard-educated lawyer, an anti-federalist, truth to power kind of a guy. We're so gratified to have him back.
And of course, he's an author. One of his books is Tackling America's Toughest Questions. So let's bring Dr. Boyle on. If you're there listening, good morning.
Good morning, John and Mary. Thank you very much for having me on again, and my best to your listening audience.
It's good to hear your voice again. We really, really appreciate you weighing in on this controversial and important topic. You have written articles recently, or they appeared, I should say, about the Federalist Society and what ultimately that means for the Supreme Court. Would you like to begin there?
Sure. We have to understand that right now we have on the U.S. Supreme Court 6 members of the Federalist Society, and I would also say Justice Kagan is a fellow traveler of the Federalist Society, having said, quote, "I love the Federalist Society," unquote. And the Federalist Society basically is right-wing, racist, bigoted, reactionary, totalitarian, anti-LGBTQ, anti-feminist, anti-labor, etc. And these are diehard members of this particular ideology, and they have been put on the Supreme Court to promote the ideology of the Federalist Society, starting with the Reagan administration and Ed Meese, and you know all about Reagan and Meese out there in California. They proceeded to pack the federal judiciary at all levels with members of the Federalist Society that Meese and Bork helped found. And it became a litmus test if you wanted an appointment to a high-level position in the Department of Justice, which then would be a stepping stone to a federal judgeship up to and including the U.S. Supreme Court. So what I'm trying to do here is place into perspective what we just saw with the Dobbs opinion. This has been underway and planned and plotted for quite some time under Reagan, and then under Bush Sr., they continued Federalist Society appointments. And then Bush Jr., for 8 years, they were all Federalist Society appointments for the most part. And then under Trump, where the Federalist Society would just send over to the White House their federal judicial nominees, including for the Supreme Court, and Trump would put them on, and McConnell would just approve them. So that, I'm afraid, is what we are facing and will continue to face. The agenda of the Federalist Society certainly is to reverse the decisions by the Warren Court. You remember Justice Warren was a Republican governor out there in California, and that would include Brown versus the Board of Education, and even more so to reverse the New Deal by Franklin Delano Roosevelt and turn the U.S. Supreme Court back to the Herbert Hoover type of Supreme Court. So I'm afraid that's what we are facing, to be honest about it, at least my assessment, having, opposed the Federalist Society, I guess, since late 1986.
Professor Boyle, I don't understand why they're so influential, why they're so powerful. They seem so 1980s. When we think of the Federalist Society being co-chaired by Robert Bork and U.S. Senator Orrin Hatch, this is like the 1980s distilled. They seem so out of step with the majority of the country, with regard to reproductive rights, same-sex marriage, guns, environmental protections, election fraud, etc. How is it that they're so influential when they're so out of step?
Well, John, first, you are right. They're out of step, as I said. They want to return the Supreme Court to the bad old days of the Herbert Hoover Supreme Court and undo FDR's New Deal legislation and era and Supreme Court. And it's not just me saying that, John. Judge Lawrence Walsh, who was the independent prosecutor appointed by President Reagan in the Iran-Contra scandal, said this as well. And Judge Walsh was a lifelong Republican. He worked for Governor Dewey in New York, fighting the mob there. He became Deputy Attorney General under President Eisenhower. He was president of the American Bar Association. He was a federal district judge. So even Reagan appointed him as independent counsel. And so he was as diehard a Republican you could possibly imagine. And yet it was Judge Walsh who first pointed out that the Federalist Society wants to take the Supreme Court and the country back to before FDR and the New Deal. That's how reactionary these people really are. Now, how did they become so influential? Well, they were first founded around 1983, and they got organized. And not only did they get organized, but they had access to power with Mies. Mies was putting aside what he did there in California. He was White House counsel for Reagan during the first term and was involved in selections of everyone for federal judicial appointments, U.S. Supreme Court appointments, and also high-level appointments in the Department of Justice that would be stepping stones then to federal judicial appointments. And then Mies became Attorney General for 4 years under Reagan. So Mies had eight years to solidify these people in power. And then Bush Sr. just continued it. That was 12 years continuously. And then the same pattern of behavior under Bush Jr. for 8 years, and then then Trump for 4 years. So that's a lot of time to solidify power. I remember when Bork, head of the Federalist Society, sent out a mass mailing fundraising letter attacking Judge Walsh and me personally, using us to raise money. And, I didn't bother me, but, assaulting the integrity of Judge Lawrence Walsh, it's astounding to me, given his Republican credentials. At that time, I forget the exact year, it might have been 1999, there were about 25,000 members of the Federalist Society. Well, just recently, the Wall Street Journal reported there are 60,000 members. So they've moved forward. And I'm a political independent, John, so I'm not here to criticize Democrats or one way or the other, but they never got organized. The Democrats never came up with their alternative competitor to the Federalist Society until the American Constitution Society, which basically collects all the Democrat lawyers in there. I'm not a member of either of these organizations, but they weren't set up, I think it was until 2001 or 2002. It's 20 years behind the Federalist Society. Right. So they've had unhindered access and endorsement to power. Again, 8 years of Reagan, 4 years of Bush Sr., 8 years of Bush Jr., and 4 years of Trump. That's a lot of power.
Mm-hmm. It is. You have written that the Federalist Society, and by extension, the Supreme Court, argues or rules that it can overturn Roe versus Wade and make other shocking decisions by a complete distortion of the Constitution and a phony concept of what's called originalism. What do you mean by that?
Sure, John. You could take a look at Alito's opinion there in Dobbs overturning Roe versus Wade. It said that is originalism, but it's totally bogus. I studied originalism at Harvard Law School with the late great Paul Freund, that even Harvard Law School says was their number one professor of constitutional law. And what did I learn about originalism? This was 1974, that it was total baloney. Studying with Professor Freund, we studied the very famous steel seizure case where President Truman seized the entire steel industry That was struck down by the U.S. Supreme Court. And there was a very famous concurring opinion by Mr. Justice Jackson that we all studied. And you understand, everyone now in the Supreme Court either went to Harvard or Yale, except Justice Barrett, who went to Notre Dame Law School. I interviewed there years ago for a job. It's a very fine law school. I'm sure she studied steel seizure like the rest of us. And Jackson was Attorney General for President Franklin Roosevelt. He was also the chief prosecutor at Nuremberg. So here is Justice Jackson in 1952 debunking originalism, which I studied with Professor Freund at Harvard Law School. Quote, just what our forefathers did envision or would have envisioned had they foreseen modern conditions must be divined from materials almost as enigmatic as the dreams Joseph was called upon to interpret for the Pharaoh. That's the story from the Bible. A century and a half of partisan debate and scholarly speculation yields no net result, but only supplies more or less apt quotation from respected sources on each side of any question. They largely cancel each other out, unquote. That's what I learned about originalism from Professor Freund in 1974, and that's what everyone at, certainly Harvard and Yale, studying the steel seizure case, learns about originalism too. It's total bunk and baloney. Indeed, Chief Justice Roberts cited the steel seizure case and Jackson's opinion in one of his opinions dealing with foreign affairs. So everyone knows this is bunk and baloney. It really goes back to a speech Bork gave at a law school with sort of off-the-cuff remarks that they published, which I did read years ago. There was no constitutional argument or authority or anything like that. It was purely ideologically driven. And remember two things about Bork. When Nixon ordered Elliot Richardson to fire the special prosecutor Archibald Cox, Elliot Richardson refused to do it and resigned as a matter of principle, or fired, and his deputy, Ruckelshaus.
We do have a caller who has a question for Dr.
Professor Boyle. My question relates to what John just said, and it addresses your really astute point about the lack of organization on the Democratic side, and also the Planned Parenthood, Celeste Richards, the activist side. How are they going to get organized, and why have they been? We had 16 years of Democratic leadership. Where were they? And they were lawyers trained at Harvard and Yale. So I think it'd be very important to figure out how to get the lawyers who understand and the activist groups together to work together to counter the Federalist Society and the other strengths on the other side, the anti-women rights groups.
Thank you, caller.
Well, again, I'm a political independent. I'm not here to criticize Democrats, but they were more interested in winning elections, which is fine, and really paid no attention, in my assessment, to the Federalist Society infiltration and takeover of the federal judiciary, including now the United States Supreme Court, where you have 6 Federalist Society members, and Kagan is a fellow traveler. They just did not take these people seriously. It was not on their agenda. Let's take President Biden. You had Clarence Thomas there, and Biden was chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee. He was chair for many years. Biden could have killed these people off if he wanted to, and he didn't. They just did not take it seriously. In my assessment, trying to be fair to the Democrats, they were more interested in winning elections as they saw it than worrying about judges. And so they let these people on instead of, fighting tooth and nail to stop them. I mean, everyone knew, starting, with Clarence Thomas, now the senior member, Thomas was put on there definitely to overturn Roe versus Wade. and Biden went along with it. Every one of these Federalist Society judges, justices, it was known they were being put on there to overturn Roe versus Wade. There was no battle organized against them by the Democratic Party. They just, in my opinion, rolled over and played dead, and not just on Roe v. Wade, but now we just see the current term of the court. If you have a look at the Wall Street Journal, they have an article in there saying this is the most conservative term of the court that we have seen since 1932. That's correct. Since Franklin Roosevelt won that, since before Franklin Roosevelt won that election. And what we are going to see is that this court has just gotten started. You have to understand it. They have just gotten started on their agenda. You saw Thomas saying, well, don't worry about contraception, gay rights. Well, not Thomas, but Kavanaugh. Well, they all dissembled, every one of them, in their testimony to be confirmed by the Senate Judiciary Committee on Roe v. Wade. Indeed, Thomas lied outright when he was asked, well, when you were at Yale Law School, did you discuss Roe versus Wade? And he said, no. Well, I was at Harvard Law School at that time, and of course everyone discussed Roe versus Wade and had an opinion on it. And they were all dissembling on certainly on Roe versus Wade, and the Democrats rolled over, played dead, and didn't do anything to stop them. So here we are today. I think it was a failure of leadership by the Democratic Party to take these judicial appointments seriously. My dealings, I have had dealings, with the Democratic Party on other issues. Their concern was just winning elections, and they didn't really do very much about the judiciary. And here we are. And as I said, these people are just getting started. We can look to them rolling back all the Warren Court precedents to begin with, and start chipping away at FDR's New Deal. So it's a very serious situation. This is just the tip of the iceberg, what we saw.
I agree. I think same-sex marriage and election fraud and a lot of civil rights and affirmative action will be under assault as well.
John, affirmative action will be dead next term. That's for sure. It's out.
Yeah, I mean, this is so upsetting. So what can we do? We need a battle plan. Is the plan to, can we impeach, like, say, Kavanaugh for dissembling during his confirmation hearing? Or is a constitutional amendment for choice the answer? Or is court packing the answer? What's our battle plan?
Well, John, I have been advocating counter packing of the Supreme Court. This is not court packing, it's counter packing. Yes. Because the Republican presidents, going back to Reagan and Meese, have been packing the Supreme Court with these Federalist Society justices that today we have 6 of them, and Kagan, a fellow traveler. So I'm advocating counterpacking. That can be done, but the Democrats will have to win the House and the Senate. And I think, again, just speaking as a legal scholar that is concerned about what the Supreme Court is going to do, the Democrats have to make this a campaign issue right now, here, today, counterpacking. That if we're elected, we control the House and the Senate. We will increase the number of Supreme Court justices, I'd say by 6 at least, to counteract and counterpack these 6 diehard movement Federalist Society justices we have on there. Understand, right. There's nothing moderate about any of them. I mean, they're saying the Chief Justice Roberts is moderate. No, he's Mac the Knife. He believes in death by 1,000 cuts. So his objective is still the same. They call it incrementalism, but it's ultimately the same objective. That's what's facing us.
you're saying counterpacking it, that we increase the number of justices from the current 9, and then the Democrats find candidates that could balance, if you will, what's going on right now. I mean, is this not political? This seems. I know it's about power, but do they base their appointees in religion, morals, or is it just sheer greed and power?
It is all political, Mary. I mean, you have to understand that as the Republican administrations have seen it, starting with Reagan, this is all political, and it's all about power. That's right. And the Democrats have been playing tiddlywinks with these people, and they've never seen it as a question of absolute power control and domination. Yes, it's politics. Indeed, if there were any doubt about that, it goes back to Bush v. Gore, where you saw 5 Republican justices steal that election from the American people and anoint Bush Jr. as president. And, that was just raw, naked, brutal power there. It was orchestrated by Scalia when he was on the Supreme Court. Again, a diehard Federalist Society guy, worked for Mies, originalism, etc. So, yeah, we're dealing here with raw, naked, brutal power.
Professor Boyle, we have another caller for you before we have to say goodbye. Caller, if you're with us, go ahead with your question.
Okay, one of the things I feel like that hasn't been addressed is who is funding all of this. That the corporations, large corporations, are funding this because, like, right after the Roe versus Wade decision, they stripped the EPA of the rights to regulate. And I feel like if people want to do something effective, they need to address who is funding this, which are large corporations. And it's
correct.
like the tort reform, what that happened years ago, for years they've been putting these judges who are pro-corporate into power. So if you could address that.
Yes, that is correct. There's a good deal of literature out there on who funds the Federalist Society. These right-wing foundations, Richard Mellon, Scape, and others, yes, it's very clear who's funding them for these purposes, and you are perfectly correct, yes.
I wanted to talk a little bit more about court packing before you left, Professor Boyle. Can we go a few minutes after the half an hour that you committed to? Is that
sure,
okay?
But remember, we're talking about counterpacking here.
Oh, counterpacking.
It's the Republicans for 8 years of Reagan, 4 years of Bush Sr., 8 years of Bush Jr., and 4 years of Trump that have been packing the Supreme Court with the Federalist Society. Yes.
Okay, so that's the word of the day, counterpacking. And I wanted to ask you about that. We know that FDR, President Roosevelt, had a plan to expand the Supreme Court back when his New Deal was unresolved by conservative justices. And even though his counterpacking plan didn't succeed, you still called it a great success. What do you mean by that?
Right. Well, once the plan was unfolded, the Supreme Court got the message and began to uphold his New Deal legislation until he was able to put his own justices on there. My assessment, however, of the current 6, these are die-hard, reactionary, ideological members of the Federalist Society that were put on there precisely for that position. So I just don't think that, you can threaten counterpacking. I think, the Democrats have to say, this is what we are going to do if you give us control of the House and the Senate. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to do it, and we're not just going to threaten it. Because, look at the reaction Alito, if you read Alito's opinion there in Dobbs overturning Roe, he just says, we on the Supreme Court don't give diddly squat what the American people think or have to say. It's irrelevant to our determinations. Well, fine. Then we, the American people, will have to respond and say, good, then we'll put some other people up there on the Supreme Court who are going to care about what the American people think. While, not just Roe v. Wade, but a whole constellation of issues that are now under threat. And I kid you not. Look, the Federalist Society, at their annual meetings, practice moot courts on convincing the U.S. Supreme Court to overturn Brown versus the Board of Education. If you can believe that, it is true. And Brown is one of their objectives. Indeed, even Scalia said in a lecture he gave at Columbia Law School that if he were on the Supreme Court at the time, he would have ruled against the plaintiffs. So Brown versus the board is on the chopping block too. That's how you saw just this. They cut back Miranda. They're going to cut back everything.
Professor Boyle, we're going to give you the last word. We promised that we wouldn't keep you more than 30 minutes, and we're already running overtime. As a final comment, imagine yourself giving a. I think we haven't. Do we have another call? Okay. No. Imagine yourself giving a keynote address at Planned Parenthood, or better yet, the National Democratic Convention, National Democratic Committee. And you are making the argument for counterpacking. Take it away, my friend.
Well, I just want to go back to your first caller in, that everyone has to start to get organized here on judicial appointments. Because I regret to say, I've been opposing the Federalist Society since 1986. But I regret to say so many of my colleagues in legal education either haven't taken them seriously or are afraid to speak out because they have so much power now, even in legal education. Bork at one point publicly said, well, now that we've taken over the federal judiciary, we're now going to take over the legal academy. So people are going to have to get organized here and understand the dangers to our republic presented by these 6 Federalist Society justices and the rest of them now occupying these positions of power and influence throughout the federal judiciary. And by the way, in state court judges too, the Federalist Society spent time getting elected to state Supreme Courts, their members. And now, as you know, under Dobbs, the whole issue of abortion rights is thrown back into the states and into the state Supreme Courts. And, I hate to say, I'm not familiar with all, California or everywhere else, but for many states, the fix has already been put in with Federalist Society judges on state Supreme Courts. So these people had a long-term plan going back to Mies and Bork in the early 1980s. It's a juggernaut that confronts us.
Right. Oh, it just seems so wrong. Dr. Boyle, we do thank you for staying over a few minutes and speaking with us about this very, very timely and important topic. And if we can't impeach, we must counterpack, right?
Yeah. And Professor Boyle, we have Robin Marty as our guest next month. She just appeared on NPR's Morning Edition. We're very happy to have her as a guest. She just wrote the new handbook for a post-Roe America, the complete guide to abortion, legality, access, and practical support. We hope you call in on that show and join Robin Marty as well. This is again, as speaking as the father of 5 daughters, I could not be more upset than I am right now over the recent Supreme Court decision. And a guest like you and Robin Marty will help galvanize a call to action for counterpacking and other measures I believe we need to take.
And that program is August 4th coming up.
Yeah, I'll be on
Professor
family vacation. Sorry.
Oh, well, that's okay. That's important too. Well,
Right.
again, thank you so much for being with us once again. You've spoken before in previous shows about biowarfare and nuclear policy and war crimes and human rights, and now we're talking about this very, very important topic. So thank you again. Happy vacation, and we look forward to having you back.
Well, again, thank you very much, John and Mary, for having me on, and best to your listening audience.
Thank you, Professor Boyle.
Thank you so much.
Sure. Bye-bye.
So, you're listening to Heroes and Patriots, a program about national security, intelligence, and foreign policy. We are having someone on next. It's 37 minutes past the hour. He's been a past guest and has always been interesting, informative, and timely. And that person is Richard Silverstein. Mr. Silverstein has published Tikkun Olam since 2003, which is a blog. It exposes the secrets of the Israeli national security state. He lives in Seattle, and he publishes regularly at Middle East Eye, The New Arab, Al Jazeera English, The Nation, Truth Out, and many, many other outlets. Good morning, Richard. Are you with us?
I'm with you. I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Welcome back to the program. It's good to have you back. Let's start with something that the New York Times reported yesterday, July 6th, and that being that the Palestinians are very angry at the United States after Washington said it had concluded that Shireen Abu Akleh, a Palestinian-American journalist, was killed while reporting in the occupied West Bank, was likely shot unintentionally by a bullet fired from Israeli military lines. Could you weigh in on that latest development?
Well, a little background on this. Shireen Abu Akleh was the premier journalist covering the West Bank and Palestinian affairs for Al Jazeera, which is a Qatari news outlet, TV, and possibly radio and also print. And she was covering an Israeli operation in the Palestinian village of Jenin. And everything where she was standing was very quiet. She was outside of any action happening between the Palestinians who are resisting the Israeli incursion and the Israelis themselves. All of a sudden, shots rang out, and she was hit by a sniper's bullet, by an IDF sniper's bullet, and there were a number of very painstaking investigations done by multiple media outlets about the circumstances of the murder, and they all concluded that not only it had to have been a deliberate, intentional killing, but that the Israelis themselves were responsible. There was even a picture of the armored vehicle from which the sniper shot her, and they investigated the acoustic evidence, the weapon itself, and they concluded that it had to be Israel that did this. Now, there were demands for an investigation. The Palestinians did one, and the Israelis did a whitewashed one, and then they asked the United States to get involved, and they supposedly did a painstaking independent investigation, and they found, as you said, that she was likely killed by Israel, but that it couldn't have been intentional, and that it was just a tragic accident. As I said, everybody and their mother knows what really happened, and this is basically a whitewash of the Israeli position on behalf of Israel.
So once again, Israel gets a get-out-of-jail-free pass. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's why I called it a whitewash. United States and the Biden administration takes care of Israel, protects it, and makes sure that it doesn't face any scrutiny.
Now, was she a U.S. citizen? Or
Oh yes, I forgot to mention that. Absolutely,
yeah.
She was Palestinian, but she was also a U.S. citizen. And we expect our government to protect us if we're
Correct.
U.S. citizens and overseas and in danger, whether we're in prison in a foreign country or whether we're in danger in any way. And so this was, doubly a pathetic act on the part of the United States.
Yeah, I think that needs to be pointed out that Shireen Abu Akleh was a U.S. citizen reporting in Palestine, and you have to wonder why whitewash the case? Why give Israel another get-out-of-jail-free pass? And I think it has something to do with President Biden's upcoming visit to the area. Do you want to explain, Richard?
Sure. Biden is taking his first trip to the Middle East. He's going to visit Saudi Arabia. The Crown Prince Mohammed ibn forget his last name. Anyway, he's visiting the most powerful leader in Saudi Arabia, the one who's responsible for the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, who wrote for the Washington Post. And then he's going to go to Israel, and he's going to supposedly visit Mahmoud Abbas, the leader of the Palestinian Authority. But yes, he wants everything to be nice and quiet and tidy before he gets to Palestine. And that's unfortunately for him not going to happen, because this statement just really reopens the can of worms.
Yeah. So Biden will be going hat in hand, I guess, to Saudi Arabia to plead for lower oil prices, perhaps, because gas is $6 a gallon, something like that.
They've already tried to telephone. He's already tried to reach the Saudi Crown Prince, and the news has it that the first attempts that he made, the Saudis wouldn't even pick up the phone. So I guess he decided that he had to show he was more serious, and scheduled this visit with the Saudis. So the Saudis are very unhappy with the U.S. because we are trying to renew the Iran nuclear deal, which the Saudis are one of the chief rivals in the region of Iran. And so they have refused so far to increase production, which would bring the price down. And so really the sole purpose of the trip is to beg, really, for more oil for U.S. gas tanks.
Right. U.S. foreign policy and the State Department right now is very much distracted, and understandably so, by Russia's invasion of the Ukraine. But I think Iran, our relations with Iran and the nuclear power deal there has kind of been forgotten a little bit. Bring our listeners up to date on this very important aspect of foreign policy that is kind of forgotten for the moment.
Well, the Obama administration signed a deal with European allies, Russia, China, and Iran, that would constrain Iran from building a nuclear weapon. Now, Iran denies that it was building one, denies it has an intention to build one, while Israel has up to 200 nuclear weapons and isn't a member of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which Iran is. So Iran and the U.S., the Trump administration, Donald Trump, obviously wanted to undo everything to do with Obama, so he backed out of the nuclear deal, and Iran proceeded to go on its merry way and enrich uranium, which would be used to create a nuclear weapon. And now Biden is trying to get back, renew the deal, and the Iranians are balking at the conditions, and they're really at a standstill. But nevertheless, Israel, which opposes the deal, Saudi Arabia, which opposes the deal, don't want it to happen because they see Iran as their greatest enemy, and they want nothing to do with Iran. They don't want anyone else, any other powers like the U.S., to negotiate any deal with Iran.
Wow. And how does that whole how do those whole discussions and negotiations play out in the proxy war that we know is Syria?
Well, Syria is very complicated. You have on the one side the Assad regime and his allies, which are Putin's Russia and the Iranians, and Hezbollah, which is the militant group in Lebanon. And on the other side, you have various countries like Turkey and Israel, of course, and the United States, where we actually have troops in Syria. And so each side is jockeying for position. The Russians have really devastated Syria with merciless bombing, which has killed many Syrians. And Israel has been attacking the Iranian weapons that are transiting across Syria and going to Hezbollah and Lebanon. So Israel has had thousands of air attacks on Syrian positions, and that's what you've got going on there. You've got proxies fighting over territory in Syria.
Yeah. I've always believed that if a third world war is going to start, it will not happen in Ukraine, but probably in Syria. It's a conflict that not many Americans understand because it's not widely reported upon, except by people like you. Will you explain to our audience a little bit how the alternative press is really speaking truth to power when it comes to Israel, and also how Israel has a whole, I want to say almost, I want to call it a propaganda machine. Maybe you want to call it a damage control machine, where misdirection and obfuscation and false news are all strategies employed by Israel to cloud and confuse the real issues. Will you comment a bit?
Sure. What's known as the Israel lobby, which is American organizations and American citizens in this country, have been organizing really since the early 1950s, right after the state was created, in the United States to craft Israel's interests and Israel's message to the American people. There are hundreds of millions of dollars have been donated to U.S. Political leaders and Congress, Senate, House races, and the presidency on behalf of the Israel lobby, and to ensure both Israel getting out of, as she said, getting out of jail free if there's ever controversy, if there ever is Israeli attacks and war against Gaza or the other wars that have happened in the Middle East, and also to advance Israeli interests by sending U.S. weapons systems to Israel to allow it to engage in these aggressive attacks against the frontline states. So this is one of the most powerful lobbies in this country, if not the most. It's right up there with the NRA and other industry lobbying groups, and it just receives like millions of dollars in donations that are passed along to U.S. congressional candidates and Senate candidates.
Yeah, a very well controlled, a very well funded, and very tightly controlled public relations machine. And then there are voices like yourself that speak truth to power, which, by the way, I also believe that our radio station is as well. We're supported by small donations, and we bring reporters like yourself and Professor Francis Boyle, who we had on the show immediately before you, to the public, and we get on the record and we get them to report the truth. How do you survive financially, and what are some of the other alternative independent media sources in the Middle East?
Well, thank you for mentioning that. I survive on donations from my readers and on the commissions that I get for the pieces that I publish in those outlets that you mentioned. But I should add that only stations like KMUD and various other independent public radio stations around the country are the ones that are interested in my reporting. I don't get invitations or I don't get interviewed by the mainstream media very much, if at all. It's very difficult for Americans to understand what's going on in the Middle East. And Israel does a very good job of obfuscating that, using a lot of smoke and mirrors to confuse people and put out counter narratives to obvious outrages like what happened to Shireen Abu Akleh. It's very hard. The media itself is not interested in covering complicated stories. They want to cover things that are easy to understand. Ukraine being invaded by Russia, and then domestic issues, those really take up the huge majority of time on TV and media, print media and radio as well. So we're in a sense sort of crying out in the wilderness here, but we're fighting the good fight, and thanks to you and your listeners and media in other places, we are doing our best to get the truth out.
The United States has already signaled that it does not expect Israel to pursue criminal charges against any particular soldier for the killing of Abu Akleh.
A U.S. citizen.
A U.S. citizen. What do you think is going to be the backlash on this, if any, and what should happen?
Well, what should happen, but won't happen, is that Israel should agree to a truly independent investigation. The Palestinians have asked the International Criminal Court to get involved and to add this to the list of war crimes that it is investigating against Israel. And there should be an international tribunal, and Israel should be held accountable. The soldier who killed her should be named. The commander who gave the approval for shooting her should be named. And the Israeli army should prosecute these people for engaging in outrageous conduct. This is the murder, the deliberate murder of a journalist. And when journalists are murdered in countries where there is the rule of law, they're taken into account. They're held responsible for the crimes that they've committed. And this is not going to happen in Israel, because it is not the kind of Western democracy where there is the rule of law, there is accountability, and it's going to be covered up. You're never going to hear the name of the killer, even though Israel knows exactly who it was, because he was doing what his commanders and what the Israeli people want him to do, which is to suppress Palestine and to target anyone who is a voice for Palestinians, which she was.
Richard, we're going to have to let you go. I want to thank you for being on the show, but before we do, I want you to plug your blog and your work, and where listeners may become readers.
Thanks for that. So I publish my blog, Tikkun Olam, at richardsilverstein.com. And I hope that people will take a look at it. And I publish, as you mentioned, for the New Arab, Middle East Eye, Jacobin Magazine, and Al Jazeera English. So you can see my byline in all of those publications. And I have a new piece out in the New Arab about the BDS boycott against Ben & Jerry's ice cream. I mean, against Unilever for selling Ben & Jerry's ice cream business in the West Bank.
I remember reading about that. Thank you, Richard.
Wow.
Thank you so much, my friend.
It's always great to be with you. Thanks, John and Mary.
You bet. So we just have a few more minutes. We've been speaking this last half hour with Richard Silverstein. He has published Tikkun Olam since 2003, and that's TIKUNOLAM. It exposes the secrets of Israeli national security state, and obviously this was certainly a secret that has been held.
Sure, this was the assassination of an American journalist.
Right?
I mean, it's just shocking, and thank God for stations like KMUD that we'll have guests like Richard Silverstein on the show. Before we go, I want to plug our next show on August 4th one more time. We have Robin Marty, who is on the front lines of the pro-choice movement. She was just featured on NPR's Morning Edition. I am so happy she's agreed to be on the show for the entire hour. We will publicize the show in as many places as we can, because we do want a lot of listener participation. Robin Marty is the director of operations at the West Alabama Women's Center in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. That, as many know, Alabama is one of the anti-choice states, and she is the author of the book Handbook for a Post-Roe America from Seven Stories Press. We on our website we will feature her interview with NPR. It's called "Patients in Trigger Law States Reorient Themselves After Access to Abortion Care Halts." So we'll post that to our website as well. We're also hoping to get some signed editions of Robin Marty's book. And I'll talk about it with the station management, but for every new member that comes in, I'm willing to donate during the show, I'm willing to donate a autographed copy of the book from Robin Marty. Again, her book is called The Handbook for a Post-Roe America, and it's from Seven Stories Press. And it really is kind of like a battle plan. It really is important stuff. And again, it's coming straight from the West Alabama Women's Center.
Right.
And it provides a complete guide to abortion legality, access, and practical support. And, get the health care you need by any means necessary. That could well be the subtitle for the book.
Right.
And she's on the front lines in Alabama.
Speaking of KMUD station management, I think somebody had a birthday this week.
Oh, yes.
We want to remember.
We want to say happy birthday to Tanya. Tanya is a real friend of our show. She's not just a staffer at KMUD Radio, but she makes a lot of what we do happen behind the scenes.
Behind the scenes,
She gets the press releases out. She gets the public service announcements out. She just, she's
on task.
She's on task. So happy birthday, Tanya.
Very good. Well, this has been our show for July 7th, 2022. We hope you will return when we have our next show, August 4th, Thursday.
With Robin Marty.
And until then, have a safe July, and we look forward to having you hear us then.
And thank you so much for supporting your community radio station, wherever you are, wherever you live, wherever you're listening to this show. We're the voice of the Redwoods. We are KMUD Radio. We are your community radio station. Thank you for listening, and thank you for supporting this public radio station.